Welcome back to the channel, guys. So today we have Steve WRAITH, actor, author, and podcast host on YouTube. Steve WRAITH. So if you want to jump over to his channel and give it a wee subscription, that would be appreciated. So Steve, tell me a wee bit about yourself.
What do you want to know, I guess? At the moment, I'm approaching 50, and I've lived a very interesting life, colourful life, a life on the right side of the tracks. I've tended to really spin a lot of plates and, you know, managed to keep those plates moving without letting anything that I've started, you know, fall by the wayside. And I think I've prided myself on being a man of respect and a man of my word, and somebody who's always tried to, you know, give 150% to anything that I'm doing. And I've just, you know, really made a point of trying to enjoy life, appreciate life, and, you know, make the best, not just for me, but for my family as well. And I think that's really important. And I think especially after the last, you know, 18 months where, you know, the world has been gripped in a pandemic, I think that, you know, I've, you know, probably, you know, learned a lot more about myself. But, you know, we're always learning, we're always moving on. I like to keep myself busy, and yeah, I'm enjoying life, Ronan. And you know, I think that the introduction you gave us and the different areas that I'm involved in probably just tells you a little bit about us. But yeah, I enjoy life, Ronan. I think that's the key.
Well, that's great, Steve. The thing about it is, a lot of people don't know about your acting career. I've researched you a bit there, and you were in some big things. Like you were in a lot of what were your early movies that you got into? What got you into acting? What sort of made
what got us into acting? I always wanted to be an actor, and from the age of 7, I was an actor. I performed in the school play King Canute. I got the lead role. And I can't remember a great deal about it. I remember performing it at the Biddick Arts Centre. I remember my parents being very proud of me. And I remember thinking, that's what I want to do. I want to be an actor. I didn't have a great start to my school life. I was in a school which wasn't performing at the highest level. And after 2 years in school, I couldn't read, I couldn't write, and I couldn't add up. So my parents decided to take me out of state school and put me into private school, at an expensive cost to them, to try and get me back on track. And at the private schools that I went to, I took elocution lessons. I was involved in poetry recital competitions to try and get me back on track. And along with that, I became a member of a young people's theatre in Newcastle on a Saturday morning. And from the age of 11 until I was 18, I performed plays. I did a variety of plays over the years. I did musicals, but I just enjoyed it. We used to go in on a Saturday morning. There was me, there was Neil Tennant, who's the singer from the Pet Shop Boys, Tom Goodman Hill, who's gone on to star alongside Sean Connery in films. And you know, there was lots of other Geordie actors, some of them who ended up in Biker Grove. And we ended up really just having fun. Saturday mornings, 10:30 till 12 o'clock, we'd improvise, we'd play games, and we'd learn lines, learn plays, rehearse plays, and perform. And I had a taste for it. And I was really lucky in the respect that I got away on 2 big trips. When I was 13, I was cast in Oedipus Rex, and we toured America at the age of 13. So I went to Philadelphia, I went to New York, and I went to New Jersey. And when I was 16, just after the communism had fallen, I guess, in Russia, I was lucky enough to travel to Russia for 2 weeks playing The Artful Dodger. So my mind was set on, was going to be an actor. I didn't want to do schoolwork. I was the class clown, much to the annoyance of my parents, who'd shelled out quite a bit of money on my education, but I was always going to be an actor. So that's where it started for me. I left school I went to college on a BTEC diploma in performing arts. But after 1 year, I walked away from it because I was cast in a pantomime. I played the lead role in the local pantomime. And it was a touring pantomime, which meant I had to learn the lines, perform, and I had to travel, sometimes doing 3 shows a day. We had to put the set up. We had to perform for 2 hours, take the set down, and travel to the next venue. I was knackered. I was only 17. I felt like it was slave labor, and I felt that could be the position I could end up in for the rest of my life. And I just thought, if this is acting, you can stick it. So that was it. I walked away from acting, and I didn't go back to it until I turned 30. So 13 years out of the acting game. And it was a chance meeting with an old friend, a guy called John Altman, who rose to fame in EastEnders playing Nasty Nick, who basically came to Newcastle and asked me if I would, by this time I was doing nightclub security. He asked if he could come and work with me in preparation for a role he was going to play. And he got the part. He went and played a doorman. He came up and he performed in Newcastle and Sunderland. And I went to watch him. And on the night out that we had afterwards, he suggested that I go back into acting. And that's how it kickstarted. I went back. I got a job as an extra, which is a supporting artist who stands off camera, from the main event, but doesn't have any words. And I went from there to, I did that for 6 years. I went from there to college and finished the course that I'd walked away from when I was 17. I took an English GCSE in performing arts for 1 year, passed that, and I thought, I'm going to take the degree. So for the next 3 years, I did a full-time degree as well as doing security in Newcastle. And I graduated when I was 39 as an actor, and I got a professional agent, and I've never looked back. So for the last 9.5 years, I've been a professional actor who has been very lucky, because it does take a degree of luck to be cast in some really, really good films. And, Rise of the Foot Soldier, of course, something which, is something I'm immensely proud of. And most recently, probably To Be Someone, which was Quadrophenia 2 with Ray Burtis. I got a really good part in that. But, exciting. But it's, I didn't want to cheat my way in. I didn't want to be somebody who knew somebody who could get us into a film. I wanted to learn the craft. I wanted to go back and do what my original dream was. And I've achieved that. And if I died tomorrow, Ronan, I could say in my lifetime that I've achieved what I wanted to achieve.
Wow. There's a lot of stuff to touch on there, Steve. First thing that I could touch on all the movie stuff there, but one thing that stood out for me there, and I think a lot of people don't have a lot of self-confidence in themselves. So way at the beginning, you said that you struggled with reading and mathematics and things like that. And your mom and dad, you had a very good mom and dad, obviously, who cared for you. So going from that, where you're struggling a little bit in school, to acting, do you think that the acting and the way of reading the script and learning sort of, it came natural then to learn because you were enjoying this learning environment? Do you think that's how you sort of progressed in your academic world?
I think we all have a talent within ourselves. You might be very good at laying bricks. I'm not. You might be very good at, kicking a football around. I'm not. I've got, 2 left feet. And you might have the knack of being able to learn a script, which clearly I have. But there's no doubt that move into private education, and I know a lot of people don't agree with private education, but that certainly helped me. My mom and dad's mindset was that as long as I could speak properly and have a conversation with somebody, that it wouldn't go wrong in life. They brought me up with respect. They brought me up with manners, but they also put me into a school which gave me the opportunity to learn how to speak properly. And, I love the Geordie accent. I love Newcastle. I'm very proud of where I'm from, but I'm very much aware that I don't have what you would call a standard Geordie accent. There's a hint of it there, but I have a very different way of speaking. And that is because I was taught that way. And I think that is what helped me prepare to be an actor. Certainly the poetry recital competitions, which I entered, gave me the confidence to go on stage. But the enrollment in the youth theatre, which was an outside of school activity, gave me that opportunity to hone my talents and perform on a regular basis. And I ended up with some really, really good parts in that theatre school. I was cast when I was 12 in the adult theatre production of Cider with Rosie. And I've still got the cutting. It was something my grandfather, who's passed away now, sadly, used to have in his wallet, of my very first review in the paper when I was 12. And I got the star billing as a 12-year-old, a wonderful performance by Steve WRAITH. And I was delighted with that, you know, and I still am today. I look back on that with an immense amount of pride. And, you know, that meant and still does mean as much to me as, you know, people saying when they bump into me in the street or bump into me wherever I am in the world, and they go, "Are you from Rise of the Foot Soldier?" And they'll go, "Yeah," because that's such an iconic film. I get stopped a lot, and people go, "Oh, you're the one who got punched his head in with a pool cue or whatever." And it's, you know, you know, every single job you get, you're grateful for. But when I was a youngster, it was an enjoyment, and yeah, I think just, you know, being at school and having that opportunity, I'll always be thankful for my parents. And you said they were good parents. They are very good parents to actually, you know, give me that opportunity. And the school teachers who guided me through that period in my life, I still actually go out and have a meal with them every now and then. So I keep in touch with my teachers because I'm really thankful for what they did.
Well, if you can just hear some noise in the background there, it's there's work being done in the house beside me, so I apologize about that. But there's you know, it seems to me that there's a lot of kids out there today, maybe in similar situations as yourself back then, but maybe they didn't have maybe now they don't have the family support. Or what advice would you give to any young man that's trying to make it as an actor, trying to make it as anything, and maybe they're struggling academically? Maybe they're struggling with certain other issues in their life. What advice would you give them now?
Never give up on your dreams is always the key. I mean, you know, for me to have that, you know, break, which, you know, I did for 13 years, and then to come back into acting shows you can always go back into something later in life. But never give up. You know, I've got 2 kids now. I'm a father myself, and you know, I've got 2 girls, so I don't have, you know, my family had 2 boys. I've got a younger brother, but the 2 girls that I have, I always say to them, do your best at school, but it's not the be all and end all, because, you know, ultimately you will find something that you're good at, and you will be able to progress at that. You know, I put events on, so at the moment my eldest daughter comes and works for me, and I think that's a great way of her learning that nothing comes for free in this life, you know, that you've got, you know, you've got to work essentially to make a few quid to pay your way. And she understands that now, you know. But yeah, I think the advice I would give to any youngster is never give in, never give up. Always give it your best shot. And if your best shot's not good enough, at least you tried. And, you know, that is the same in life. If you work hard in life, you will get the results. But nothing comes for free. And, you know, the sooner that you realize that, I think the better.
That's a very good message, Steve. And I think that should sink home for a lot of young men and women, should I say. I forgot to mention young women too, because, you know, it's always put on that young men are the ones struggling. But you know what? In this day and age, there's young women out there that are trying their best in this crazy world, and they too have to have this motivation. It doesn't matter a man or a woman. If you're a young person and you're struggling, and maybe you're come from a bad home life, or maybe you're not academically minded, well, there is other ways and means of getting to your goal. And that's, in my opinion, that isn't taught enough. And just listening to your story there, you definitely took a different avenue than most, but you got there in the end, and that's great to hear. Just on another note, so growing up, you grew up in Newcastle then?
Yeah, local lads. Gateshead, which is just south of the river, is where I grew up. But yeah, I mean, I had a really good upbringing, and you know, despite the bad start at school, you know, I did get things right. You know, I didn't leave school with no qualifications. I came away with you know, English language and English literature, but that was more down to the fact that the English teacher in 3rd year seniors, with 2 years to go, left with a bad health issue and was replaced. And the new English teacher that came in, Peter Yates, clearly could see that I was struggling. but gave me the opportunity to read a book which I had bought on the local quayside market. And that book was A Profession of Violence by John Pearson, which was a book about the Kray twins. And he basically said to me, look, if you're struggling with the curriculum, you're struggling with the books, why don't you read the book that you're reading at home? He said, and you can use that as part of your examination. You can use that as part of your coursework. So he basically greenlit me the opportunity to read a book about the Kray twins and use that as part of my final exam. And that's what I did. So that's where my life changed really massively. That was a big moment in my life. I passed my English exam. I got a B and a C with English language and English literature. And when I left school, I wrote to the Kray twins in prison. And for the viewers in Ireland who don't know who the Kray twins are, they were a set of identical twins who were gangsters in London in the 1960s. They've had a couple of films made about them, the Krays in 1990, and then Martin and Gary Kemp from Spandau Ballet played the Krays. And in more recent years, Tom Hardy played both Ronnie and Reggie Kray in the film Legend. And I wrote to those characters and just said, look, I've read your book. I found your life fascinating. I just wanted to let you know that despite everything that's happened to you, there's a positive spin to your life in the sense that I read your book and I passed my English exam studying your story. Within a couple of days, I got a letter back from Reggie Kray, who was in Gartree prison at the time. And a couple of days later, I got a letter back from Ronnie Kray, who was in Broadmoor Hospital. And my life changed from them because when I left school, as you know, I was going to college and studying. But to make a little bit of money, I was also designing T-shirts with a friend of mine. And I would come up with the ideas for the designs and he would design them and print them and I would sell them. And we were doing ex-footballers because I'm a big Newcastle fan. We were doing Supermark, we were doing Kevin Keegan, Peter Beardsley, and we were selling, these T-shirts in decent numbers. So I came up with the idea of putting a photograph of the Krays on the front of a T-shirt, and he liked the idea. So we stuck them in the shops that we were sticking our Newcastle T-shirts into, and they were selling very quickly. And before you knew it, we had a cottage industry of Kray T-shirts going from this shop to that shop. And then Newcastle wanted them, Gateshead wanted them, Sunderland wanted them, Middlesbrough wanted them. And then they were going down to Manchester, down to Liverpool. But when we got to London, we hit a bit of a brick wall. And it was basically because the Krays' elder brother was actually making the T-shirts in London. And he said, hold on a minute, who are you guys? Why are you doing this? I'm doing these T-shirts. But the bit I missed at the start was that the permission had actually been given by the twins to do the T-shirts. I'd ended up writing backwards and forwards to Reggie Kray, and I suggested this T-shirt idea, and he greenlit it. He said, it's a great idea. We'll take 70%, you take 30%, and good luck to you. And we did. And people might think 70% sounds a bit harsh, and, these Geordies must be stupid accepting that. But, 35% went to Ron, 35% went to Reg, and 30% went to us. We, of course, had to split ours 15% each. But for a 16-year-old lad coming on 17 who didn't have a job, apart from a paper round in his grandma's shop, it was making me a nice little earner. And from there, I went down to visit them both. And the rest is history.
Wow. So let's just to touch on that a little bit. So you're making this money and that's paying the rent. Like, that's making money. I would say at that time, there's the stigma around the Krays, and there's not too many people in Ireland that won't know who the Krays are. Even the younger generation, they're quite an iconic duo, should you say, with all the different types of stories and all the things that they were into. But you're selling these T-shirts and you're in contact with the Krays. One's in Broadmoor, did you say, and one's in
Gartree in Market Harbour in Leicestershire.
Yes. Yes, and so you're in contact with these guys. And what age are you?
At that time, I was 16, going on 17.
16. You were 16. That must have been the only word I could describe that as a trip. Like, that must be like a trip. I'm in contact with these two iconic figures. I'm selling T-shirts for them, and now I've just sort of walked over the top of the brother. I know it was okay that the go-ahead was given to you, but you've sort of just collided with the brother here. He's selling T-shirts. that must have been some crazy world. At 16 years of age, if that had happened to me, I would probably think I'm a celebrity, that I'm talking to these guys. How did that feel to be doing that and to be working alongside those guys and actually making them money?
When I look back now, it's quite a remarkable journey, and I must have been quite ballsy to do it. But that was just me. My mother gave us 100% support. My dad was absolutely furious, and it didn't go down well with my grandparents either. But my mom is very much like me. We're more like brother and sister in a lot of ways, and you know, the way that we think and the way that we do things. And I think her mindset was, it'll be a phase and he'll grow out of it. But little did she know that this relationship would grow into the sense that I would end up working for them outside of prison. And my dad eventually did come round because, you know, as the relationship grew and we started making tea towels, we started making bags, the film came out, so there was a huge explosion in interest in the Krays. The Krays then brought their first book out called Our Story with Fred Dinage. Nothing was untouched. I think the only thing that was sacred, we didn't put the Krays image on toilet roll because that would have been disrespectful, but we literally put it on everything else. Pens, rulers, pencil cases, you name it, it all went out there. Posters, T-shirts, replica photographs, stuff with signatures on it, all different things which were starting, things which you would take for the norm now were really just coming into the light. And my dad was starting out on his career in IT at the time, and IT was in its infancy back then. And my dad said, Reg by this point after the film was getting something in the region of 400 letters a day. And what my dad said was, get Reg to give us the addresses, and why don't you build a database? And I'm going, well, what's a database? And he's going, well, if you create a database, I can get me the names and addresses and telephone numbers. I can put them onto what's called a spreadsheet, and it'll make it a lot easier. If you've got a line to sell, then you will be able to highlight those addresses and or highlight those phone numbers, and you just keeps a list. It's a list, a way of keeping a list, but in a more organized fashion. And this is the way to do it. So my dad ended up becoming part of the firm, unbeknown to him. And it was just, it almost became a little cottage industry. And the visits to the twins were always very interesting. I mean, Ronnie didn't entertain people a great deal. He didn't get on with a lot of people. He kept his circle very small. So over the course of the 5 years that I visited Ron, I think I visited him somewhere in the region of 11 times, which is quite a lot for Broadmoor. Reggie, of course, I would be visiting him on and off over 10 years, usually once every 2 months. So it became it just became a norm to me, very normal to go and see these people and visit them behind bars. And they were both very different. Reggie was in a prison, so he was institutionalized. When you visited Reg, he'd be in his blue and white prison shirt. He'd have a pair of jeans on, a pair of Reeboks. He would come into a big visiting room and he would sit down. He'd pull out loads of bits of paper out of his shirt pocket, which were notes that he'd prepared for the visit. And he'd start talking business. When you went to see Ronnie in Broadmoor, he was in a hospital. So there was no prison officers surrounding us like there was with Reg. There was nurses. But Ron would come in, and Ron was almost stuck in a time warp. He would walk in with a suit on, usually a pinstripe suit. Could be black, could be blue. He'd have a little hanky tucked into his top pocket. He'd have an immaculate white shirt on. It would still have his RK initials embossed on his breast. He'd have a silk tie on and a gold tie pin, Gucci shoes. He'd have a little He had a little pinky ring on, and he would come in late. He would arrive late, so he made a big entrance. He'd stop at the door, look in, and then he would walk over to you and sit down, and he'd shake your hand and he'd click his fingers, and then someone would come in. A nurse would come over and light a cigarette for him. And then he would ask you if you wanted something to eat or drink. So then he would click his fingers again. The other nurse would come and take your order. And he would sit and hold court, and he would chain smoke, anything from 20 to 40 John Player specials. Never finished a cigarette. Would always get it halfway down and then stub it out and light another one, click the fingers. And he was living in a time warp. He was literally living in a time warp. And the elder brother, Charlie, who doesn't get much of an appearance in the films, he was, of course, a free man. So my relationship with him was completely different. He opened the doors in London for me. He introduced me to virtually every villain, you know, from the 1960s. I met Bruce Reynolds, the train robber, and Tommy Wisby and Buster Edwards. I got to meet Freddie Foreman. I got to meet Joe Pyle Sr. I got to meet, you know, all of these well-known faces that I'd read about. Frankie Fraser, Mad Frankie Fraser. You know, ultimately, it was the who's who of gangland that I was introduced to over time by Charlie Krays. So doors in London were opened for me quite quickly because of my relationship with the Krays. So it was strange. And the way I always describe it, and have done since I was very young, is that it was almost as if I had the opportunity to read a book, finish it, and then climb inside it and walk through it and meet all the characters and come out of the other side and go, wow, you know, how many people get an opportunity to do that, you know?
Not too many people, Steve. And I'll say one thing, I'm listening to you there, and I'm listening, and I want to hear every single word, because to have that opportunity to be around those guys, not just the Krays, but all the other guys that you mentioned, that's priceless. There's no money that can buy you that type of experience and knowledge, should you say. Like what was it like, without talking about this too much, because we could talk about this for 6 hours, I could anyway.
Yeah.
But what was it like for yourself? You're a young man, and okay, you're not crime affiliated yourself, and you're very smart. You're like a sort of like an entrepreneur. You're looking at situations and you're trying to make a life for yourself, and it's working. And then you find yourself in this world of all these old school gangsters. Are they do they have the mannerisms like they have in the movies? Do they act like they are in the movies, or is it completely different?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we concentrate on the Krays specifically, I think that, you know, Reggie Kray, as portrayed by, let's say, Tom Hardy, was superb. I think he nailed the mannerisms. I think his performance with Ronnie Kray was slightly over the top. I was lucky enough to go to the film premiere and speak to Tom Hardy, and I said exactly the same to him. But as an actor, it's got to be difficult to play two brothers, you know, and there's a complete lack of video footage or audio footage of the Krays back in the 60s, apart from that BBC News interview where they speak. We know they speak very quietly. We know they're almost inaudible, very nasal and speaking through their nose. But yeah, I think the mannerisms and stuff or the reputations went before them. I mean, when I used to go to London, I always used to wear a suit. Whether I went to visit Reg or Ron, I felt it was a respectful thing to do. When I went to London, I was always respectful. And I think the reason I got on with these people and you know, I managed to, you know, work with a lot of these people on different things was because I never lied about who I was. I didn't say, oh, I'm Steve Wraith, I run Newcastle, or I'm Steve Wraith, I'm a, you know, gangster from up north. Because as soon as you start telling tales or telling lies, you're always going to get caught out. Someone is always going to know the truth, and someone is always going to be able to drop you in it. So I didn't pretend to be anything I wasn't, you know, and there was occasions where somebody might say, oh, do you fancy doing a bit of this, or do you fancy doing a bit of that? And as you've already said, I'm not crime affiliated. I'm not a criminal. I'm not a gangster. None of that really interested me at all. And I was never tempted to be a criminal or do anything like that. And I guess it wasn't until probably Ronnie Kray's funeral in 1995 when he passed away in hospital after a short illness. When I was part of the funeral cortege, and Dave Courtney, who obviously is a well-known celebrity villain from London, had been given the job of doing the security on the day. And he contacted me and asked me because by this time I'd progressed into doing some door work in Newcastle, if I would like to go down and be involved in the funeral. He asked us actually to go and look after Ron's body in English's funeral parlour, but I didn't want to do that, and I couldn't have done it anyway. But I did go down on the day of the funeral, and my job on the day of Ronnie's funeral was to be Charlie Kray's minder. And I was in the cortege, I was in Charlie's car. I had to get Charlie from the car to the church and back. I had to get Charlie to the graveside and back. And there's some, you know, very infamous photos of me at the graveside. You can just see Reg is getting, you know, consoled by Charlie, and I'm standing behind them, standing next to Freddie Foreman. And that was the very first day I met Freddie, Ronnie's funeral, because Freddie had been in prison and he was out on early release for the funeral. And that photo is something which I still look back on and think, wow, you know, I'm part of gangland history. But it was around that time and that day I remember going over the Bow flyover, and I just remember the crowds that had gathered, and I remember the workmen had the yellow hard hats off, and they had them down like that, and they were paying their respect. And it was a wake up call to me. Then I went, this is a gangster's funeral. This is a guy who walked into a bar and shot somebody dead. And he's getting a send-off like Winston Churchill. And I think that was a bit of a wake-up call for me. You know, by that time, I was 23. And I'm looking at it going, got yourself in quite deep here, Steve. You know, what are you doing? And you need to be careful. So I think that was, at that time, I realised then that, you know, I would always keep it at a distance. I decided to write a book, which Charlie and Reg both gave their blessing to, about my experiences. And the book came out, you know, 2003, The Krays, The Geordie Connection. But I'm pleased to say that both Reg and Charlie had a chance to read it before it came out, and they got their blessing. But obviously the final chapter sadly involved their death because they both passed away in 2000. So, so yeah, it was a remarkable journey, something which I think gave me a lot of valuable life experience and certainly gave me a lot of contacts in London, which, you know, still hold good to this day.
That's incredible. Just I'm trying to pick up on the feelings you'd be getting on writing a book and then giving it to the guys that you're writing it about your perspective on them. Is there anxiety? Is there like a level of fear? What way are you feeling about that, handing them over the book for them to sort of read this and give their blessing that this can go ahead?
I think with Charlie, there was no concerns at all because we had a really good relationship. And you know, on the outside, Charlie and I had done a couple of charity events together where we'd raised a lot of money. One in particular, a young boy called Terry Moran in Gateshead, where I live, who'd had a horrendous bonfire accident. He had a shell suit on. He had paint thinners. A spark hit the paint thinners and he went up in flames. He ended up with 85% burns. And we managed to raise £2,100 for him. Charlie Cray came to Newcastle and hosted a party for me. We sold out. It was the very first event I put on, 300 tickets at £10 a ticket. We had a few overheads, food, DJ, etc. But yeah, we managed to raise £2,100 for the kids, and these parents were very, very thankful. So there was no worries with Charlie because I knew that he would tell me straight if there was something he didn't want in it. With Reg, I was probably more concerned about him asking for his cut when the book came out, knowing that his percentages were 70%, 30%. I was thinking I'm probably not going to make any money at all off this book. Yeah. But it was academic that sadly, you know, Charlie was arrested, of course, in '97 for an £80 million cocaine deal, and something which I maintain to this day he never ever got involved in. He was framed, and Reggie Cray sadly was diagnosed with cancer and passed away a few months after his brother had died. So, you know, the fact that they got the book, they read it in the manuscript, the first manuscript in 2000, early 2000. Both of them read it in prison and both said, great book, good luck with it, was all I needed. And, you know, I could rest easy that book came out with their blessing. And, you know, it was a book I was immensely proud of. The money didn't bother me. I didn't know if I would make anything off it. The book, I think, eventually sold something in the region of 24,000 copies and still sells to this day. Wow. And it was the very first book about the Kray twins, who, you know, no one had ever done a book about the Krays in prison or behind bars. And I think I opened a few people's eyes to the fact that the Krays probably made more money in prison than they ever did when they were free men.
Wow. So is that your introduction then into being an author and writing a book? Is that your first book then?
It was, yeah. And I worked with another author to put that out there. I mean, I actually sat for 5 years and hand wrote the book out. And I then typed it up and then went to somebody who produced the book and they said, look, I'll help you with it. And he was kind enough to do that. And yeah, that was the very first book that I brought out. But after that, I didn't have the inclination to go and write another one. And you hear about people calling things writer's block, you know, and I certainly had that. I just didn't have any inclination to do one. And I thought if I'm ever going to write a book again, it's got to be about a subject matter that I want to write about or that I'm passionate about. And I guess the two things in my locality were football hooliganism, which as a Newcastle fan, I knew that there'd been a lot of football hooligan books written about our firm, but there'd never been one written by our firm. So that was my first attempt at jumping back in and actually doing something. And the book itself was called The NME from the Bender Squad to the Gremlins, and it was a history of Newcastle United's football hooligans, and it went down really well. I worked with over 40 of the guys to get their stories, and then I pieced it together, and we made it like one voice. And the book itself, did really well. It sold well, and off the back of that, I then approached a local crime family called the Sayers, and at first, they weren't interested in bringing a book out. They had no intention in bringing a book out. They were very much old school. The Sayers in Newcastle are three well-known brothers, John, Stephen, and Michael. And they had a history of crime from an early age. And they were alleged to have taken part in some of the most notorious crimes in the Northeast. And I approached Stephen, because as a doorman, I'd come across him quite a bit in Newcastle city centre, and asked him if he'd be up for doing a book. And he said no, but fate probably played a card. Another notorious gangster in Newcastle, another notorious criminal, should I say, went onto a national TV programme and made some unsubstantiated claims about the Sayers family, which led the Sayers, Stephen in particular, to come back to me and say, an unanswered lie becomes a truth. I'd like to do the book. So the cover you see behind me, the Sayers tried and tested at the highest level, was my next book. And that to date is my, it is the bestseller. It's a bestseller in Newcastle. It's my biggest selling book. And it's, a book that I'm immensely proud of.
And where can people get your books, Steve?
You go to www.badboysbooks.net. Dead easy to remember, because it mainly is Bad Boys books you'll find on there. But yeah, I mean, you can buy most of the books by me on Amazon as well. But for me, I never wanted to become an author. And for somebody who couldn't read or write after 2 years of schooling, I still have to sometimes, rub my eyes in disbelief that I've got so many books after my name now. And every now and then I'll say, well, that's it. That's my last book, because, over lockdown, I ended up publishing 6, but writing 3 books. I did a book. Wow. I did a book over lockdown with the Massey family. Of course, the Massey family are well known in Manchester. I did a book about the main man, Paul Massey. The book which I had on display a little bit earlier, that one there, The Irish Criminal. I worked with a guy from Ireland called Brendan Quinn, and if you haven't heard about him, his story is fascinating. And this book specifically concentrates on his crimes and misdemeanors in Holland and his subsequent incarnation across there, and his subsequent escape, not just from 1, but 2 category AAA prisons. That's guy,
crazy. That's crazy.
And if you've ever seen a category AAA prison, believe you me, to escape from 1, you'd have to be Harry Houdini. To escape from 2, it takes some doing. And this book goes into the full ins and outs of why he ended up in there and how he got out. And he's got a hell of a story to tell. And I'm pleased to say that he chose me to write his book. And I've become good friends with him and his son. But yeah, quite a character. It's a good book. And I think if anybody in Ireland wants something to read or a stocking filler, that's the one to get.
Well, guys, I will be buying this book, and I will be leaving the link for all Steve's books in the description of this video. So if you want to get your husband, or maybe you want to get your wife, maybe she's into true crime, and get her a book or him a book, go to badboybooks.com, which will be in the description of this video, and I'll be buying this one for Christmas 100%.
Yeah, badboysbooks.net. We tried to get .com, but it wasn't available. But yeah, right, badboysbooks.net, yeah.
But the link will be in the description of this video. Right, so another subject that you talked about there that I'm quite interested in, football hooliganism. So we're seeing all these crazy stories in Ireland about football. Like, we've got our own hooligans here, but they're not connected to football teams. They're sort of connected to religion. But we're seeing these, there's London-based ones, there's Manchester-based ones, there's Newcastle-based ones. What is the reality of football hooligans? Is it like they say on the TV, like the movies and the TV shows, or is it a bit more tamer than that?
It's tribalism, and that's what it is. I mean, in Newcastle, our biggest rivals for many, many years were Sunderland Football Club. And that was because they were always competing against us. You know, we played each other a lot of time. That's tended to drift off now because of Sunderland being so low down in divisions. But it's tribalism. It's fighting for your city. That's the way that hooligans see it. Fighting for the pride of the city and hoping that you know, that on a match day they can go and have a couple of beers. And if they come across another set of supporters who fancy having a square go, that's what they'll do. And it's as simple as that. It became quite prevalent in the 1970s, and it's probably a reflection on the you know, the social side of things, but also the cultural side of things in the UK. You know, there was a lot of unemployment, and you know, when the unemployment hits record highs as it did then, and a lot of dissatisfaction, then people are angry. And men are angry, and they need somewhere to go and take out the frustrations, and that essentially that is, you know, that is it. It's as simple as that. And I think, you know, if you're not up for that kind of thing, then you know, you don't do it. But there's a lot of boys, a lot of lads are well up for that, you know.
Well, I have no personal experiences with it myself, but my grandfather, he's passed away now a few years. He had a lot of his kids, my mother and my uncles, in Coventry, and he was saying, you know, the football over there, he supported Coventry, he also supported Manchester United, but from the local teams, he loved Coventry, he loved the city, and he was saying that when it came to football and it came to like football hooligans, the hard men did come out. And you know, as an Irishman, he says, being in Coventry, it was, you know, you had to fight sometimes, he says, but he met a lot of friends through the football and through his job. And he says England was mad into its football, but the football hooligans were crazy. And even back then, it wasn't so much considered like they weren't hooligans, but there were a bunch of lads getting together, and maybe, as you say, Coventry v Newcastle were playing, and maybe the tensions were a bit high and it could kick off at any moment. But as the time went on, and you're getting into the 80s and you're getting into the 90s, and I do feel like drugs played a big part in the violence. Would I be correct in that?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think drugs are more prevalent now than ever before. I think in Newcastle it's always been alcohol and that's it, you know. Whereas I think nowadays, the younger generation are more on cocaine and you know, having a sniff before they go out and, you know, walk around with their Stone Island copies on looking for bother. The problem is now that it's you know, it's a waste of time now even trying to get involved in football hooliganism and doing anything like that, because ultimately the cameras, the technology the police have now, they'll just let you get away with it. They'll let you do it. But you know for a fact that, you know, a few days later, your door's going to get kicked in or you're going to get lifted. And, you know, I think football hooliganism, although people say that it's still ongoing, you know, it's died a death compared to what it was. I mean, Newcastle's main hooligan firm in the 70s and early 80s was called the NME, the New Mainline Express, the Newcastle Mainline Express. And they basically had a core squad of 200 football hooligans. And they would put £1 a week into a kitty, and that kitty would pay for anybody's court costs or solicitors' costs. It was run like an organisation. It was run properly. They had a calling card. You have just met the enemy. And, you know, it was very, very similar to what you see in the films like Green Street and, you know, about the ICF or Aberdeen, Millwall, you know, those kind of things, the dramatisation, which had the Millwall football hooligan firm on, you know, very, very similar. And, you know, you would get an introduction, you would go in, you would get to meet the local hard lad, and, you know, it would become, you know, it became a day out. It's, you know, it's something which some people can understand and some people can't. But like I said right back at the start, they see it as fighting for their city, defending the city, and you know, defenders of Newcastle. That's what they see themselves as. And you and I might not understand that, but these people, that's what they think they are, and that's their thing on a Saturday. That's what they love. That's what they love to do. That's what they live to do. And you know, it still goes on in Newcastle. I mean, it's only a couple of months ago that I think it was something along the region of 6 of our lads were given pretty hefty jail sentences for an incident down in Burnley, and it just shows you that it's not completely gone, and certain incidents can be, you know, can erupt at any time. And, you know, unfortunately for you or me as well, you could just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you could either cop for a right-hander or, you know, a glass in the face. And, you know, suddenly your life's ruined because of other people's thing that they enjoy, you know.
True, that is true. I have an experience with Newcastle fans. I went over to see Manchester United. Over here, you're either a Manchester United supporter or a Liverpool supporter. Because, you know, obviously it's not the big teams. Obviously Newcastle was a big team, Manchester United is a big team, but when the school would take you over, they would only take you to see 2 teams, Liverpool or Manchester United. So we had to choose, and I chose Manchester United. And I remember going over one year, I can't remember the date, and there was Newcastle supporters, and I think it was Nicky Butt was playing for them at the time.
Yeah,
I think he was, and I remember him coming off, and it was really animated. And I remember looking up to the side of me and seeing these Newcastle supporters, and every single one of them had their top off. And I think they were getting beat 5-0, and they were screaming, and they were swinging their top, and the whole place was just erupting. Now, I was with, like, I was a young lad, like I was only maybe about 13, 14, and all the kids were scared, but I was looking up at these guys. There was nothing scary about them. They were just, it was the atmosphere. I've never felt an atmosphere and a passion for football, even though, yes, okay, they were getting beat, but the passion they had for their players and the passion they had for their city, the Manchester United fans could not match that. I was watching I was looking around at my supporters and looking around at the Old Trafford, and was thinking, do you know what, guys, you've got nothing on these. You have nothing on these in regards to passion for your club. And is that a big thing in Newcastle in regards to passion for their football club? How do you feel about the whole thing to do with Newcastle now, and, you know, Mike Ashley and things like that? What's your opinions on the club itself?
I mean, it's very much like a religion in Newcastle football. You know, some people live and breathe for it, and, you know, they go to work 6 days a week, and on the 7th day they go to the cathedral on the hill and watch Newcastle play. And yeah, I mean, it's something I've done since 1983-84 season. That was my very first season as a young lad, and it's in you. It's, you know, you cut me, I bleed black and white, and you know, I'm very, you know, very switched on about how it goes. I mean, recent events have obviously caused a lot of controversy. We had an owner in Mike Ashley who bought Newcastle United for 140 million. He didn't do due diligence, and he found an 80 million pound gaping hole in the finances. So it meant that a club that he'd bought for 140 million had actually cost him 220, and he wasn't very happy. For the first couple of months, he was drinking with the fans. He was walking into nightclubs, buying everybody's drink. He was wearing a replica top in the director's suite, which didn't go down well. And then, you know, things just soured. And he did what he said he was going to do at the start, which is he used our football club over a 14-year period to promote his sports brand globally. And that meant that as long as his sports brand was promoted globally, it was at the detriment of our football club. And basically over that period of time, you know, he didn't invest in the stadium. He didn't invest in the training facilities. Many, many, many times he didn't invest in the team. And all of that led to, you know, 2 relegations, and potentially could lead to a 3rd one this season, because with the takeover finally going through on October the 7th, you're a 3rd into the season, you haven't picked up a win, and new owners have to come in and pick up the gauntlet and see what mess Mike Ashley's left behind. And all signs seem to suggest now that the mess that he's left behind is a pretty big one, and it's going to be very difficult to tidy it up. And we'll find ourselves in a position here where, best way to describe it is, it's like when you're a kid, you have a big party at your mum and dad's house, and they're coming back the next weekend, and They're coming back the next day, sorry. And you set your alarm to get up at 6 o'clock and try and tidy up, and your alarm clock doesn't go off and your parents are an hour away. That's where we're at the moment. You haven't got time to change everything. And I've got a horrible feeling that Newcastle will have to get relegated. Will get relegated this season and have to go down to come back. If you add to that the geopolitical arguments that we've had to have because of who's taken over. Of course, the Saudi state have 80% in the form of PIF, the Public Investment Fund. Amanda Stabley and Mirdad Gadusi, PCP Capital Partners, have 10%, and Jamie Rubin has 10%. And this really has shaken the far left to the very core. They didn't want the takeover. They didn't want Newcastle United to be owned by the Saudis. We've had all kinds of trolling and attacks on people who were supportive of it, me in particular, and others associated with me, to the point where we know there's been paid accounts. It's been proven now. There's been paid accounts. Qatari paid accounts have been attacking us on a regular basis. I've just laughed it off. But ultimately, you're finding yourself in the middle of a geopolitical war, which has nothing to do with us. I'm just interested in Newcastle United Football Club. I'm interested in who's managing the team, what the team is, and what the results are getting. I'm not interested in anything else. And every time I speak on an interview, or anytime Eddie Howe speaks, the new manager, I've seen it today, he's been questioned again about Saudi and about how they feel about the Rainbow Laces campaign this week, because the Saudis don't talk too kindly about people who are in same-sex marriages or homosexuals, and because it's the Rainbow Laces campaign this week, it feels that Eddie Howe has to be asked about that, and he has to back questions like that off every week. He was asked when he came into the club about the Saudi regime, and he said, "I'm not here to talk politics. I'm here to talk about the football," and that's exactly how I feel. And before anybody jumps on the bandwagon and says, "Oh, well, you must agree with this or you must agree with that," I don't agree with it. You couldn't get anybody more different to that. I am very, very, understanding and abhorred to anybody who has suffered at the hands of any regime, whether it be the Saudi regime, whether it be the North Korean regime, whether it be the Russians, whether it be the Americans. Because let's face it, all of those countries have got human rights issues, or have had human rights issues in their history. And I'm podcasting tonight from probably one of the smallest countries, but one of the smallest countries that colonized most of the world, and whose human rights and atrocities were probably worse than anybody's. And let's not turn it into a political, show. But we all know, about the Troubles, and we all know what happened there. And ultimately, from my perspective, don't start throwing stones in glass houses. It's ridiculous. We've got human rights issues which we had to address. America's had human rights issues. Just look at Vietnam, or the Iraqi war. Whatever you want to point, you can finger point at any of those things. Look at North Korea against South Korea. All of these countries can't, none of them can say we've got a clean bill of health on that score. And Saudi's no different. But what my argument is Saudi should be given the opportunity to change, just like we were given an opportunity to change. We haven't been cast aside by the rest of the world. As a country, England hasn't been told, we're not dealing with you. You can, do what you want, but we're not going to deal with you because of your past. That's what we should be doing with Saudi. And again, we'll always be accused. They'll always be accused of sport washing, and this has happened and that's happened. But you can say I'm very passionate about it.
Steve, listen, I agree with you. Everybody needs time to change. I totally agree with you, and I'm very happy for Newcastle that they've had this now injection of money, and youth fans now can look forward to the future. And there probably will be a lot of success now, I would say so, and I wish Newcastle all the success, because they're a great club, great people, great city, and you just deserve that success. But from a side note, as you say, you don't want to talk about the political issues regarding the Saudis and things like that. But we are in 2021, near 2022. yes, you could say the Troubles. If you look at the Troubles, you know, England played its part, Ireland played its part. A lot of different people played their part in that, and that wasn't too long ago. But we are in the age now of where everything's out in the open. We know what's going on. We know the goods, the bads. We know about North Korea. We know how bad they are. We know that it's just a massive concentration camp in North Korea. But in regards to the Saudis, we do know that they, you know, they do publicly execute people. I think that's what they do. They still have that there, and I think, isn't it, that I'm not wrong about that?
Well, look, I'm not an expert on Saudi at all. You know, we are led to believe that they have certain ways of doing things, but that's their country, that's their choice, and that doesn't have anything to do with Newcastle United. I mean, me personally, and I've spoken about this on more than one occasion, but if it's proved beyond all reasonable doubt that somebody has murdered somebody, then I would bring back the death penalty. I would bring in castration for paedophiles and beasts. 100%. I would bring in, or some kind of castration or some kind of injection to never allow these people to do what they've done again. But you know, I just think that there's so much to address, and I think that we run the risk of getting bogged down in you know, well, he did this and they did that, and you know, the Khashoggi thing's a prime example. I mean, that is one case where, you know, the widow of Khashoggi kept coming up and protesting against Newcastle's takeover. Again, I sympathise with what she's gone through. I couldn't imagine what it was like for her to find out what had happened to, you know, to a boyfriend or whatever it was. But from my perspective, that is one case. We don't know the ins and outs of it. No one is being convicted of it, and we just know that he went into the Saudi embassy, and after that, he was dead. You know, but from my perspective,
that wasn't Turkey.
Well, yeah, and from my perspective, again, that's got nothing to do with me. That's got nothing to do with Newcastle United. That's got nothing to do with my football club. PIF are, you know, obviously based in Saudi Arabia. It's the Public Investment Fund, but it's not MBS. He's not sitting at Newcastle waving from the director's box. You know what I mean? It's very complex, and it's very difficult for anybody to talk about it without, I think
I can actually sort of understand where you're coming from. Listen, if we trace back money, where this hat came from, where this mic came from, where your green screen came from, where the bricks in this house came from, if we trace back money, all money leads back to something, right? And most money, if there's money involved, there's some type of negative entity attached to money, in my opinion. So
if you get an Uber, if you use Uber Eats, or you get an Uber, or if you sit at home with your kids and watch Disney, then you are using something that is owned by Saudi Arabia. So it's one of those situations where, you know, you'll see people going, I'm never going back to Newcastle United again because of this. And then you think, well, yeah, but you got an Uber this weekend, mate, when you went on a night out, or you've used Uber Eats over lockdown, or you're sitting watching Disney with your daughter or your son, or you're doing this or you're doing that. And I'm afraid that the Saudis have got that much money and that much influence that, you know, that it doesn't really matter what you say or do. You're always going to be involved in something that the Saudis are involved in. And again, let's look at the British government. You know, they are dealing in arms with Saudi Arabia and have done for many years. There is a working relationship between the UK and Saudi Arabia. And, you know, if they're doing that, then why was the Newcastle United takeover so wrong?
Exactly. And you do have a very, very good point there. We can't demonize things. I'm not saying on the small scale, because obviously it's under no circumstances is the takeover of Newcastle United small, but considering the arms deals that Britain does have with certain countries and certain entities, should you say, you know, that can't be forgotten either. And we can't demonize one and glorify the other. And you're 100% right. Steve, we are coming up to an hour. I like to keep my podcast just around about the hour mark, because people can't really listen by the hour mark. It would be great to get you back on sometime, because you've talked about loads of subjects. I love everything to do with politics, football, hooligans, and true crime, your books. But is there anything else you would like to talk about today?
Not really. Just, you know, from my perspective, what goes on the internet, I guess, is something which we could probably finish off on, and it's just the YouTube channels, and this is the reason that I reached out to you. From my perspective, I always feel that during lockdown, a lot of people did a lot of positive things. You've started your own podcast, and like you say, you speak about a variety of subjects and a variety of things. Likewise, mine is predominantly football. I do Newcastle United, but I do dip into the true crime world because I've got a lot of connections there, and I try to use the more influential figures, the ones who are inspirational figures, those who've gone from adversity into something more heroic. I did a wonderful one a couple of weeks ago with a guy called Paul Bogey, who was addicted to heroin, managed to get himself off heroin, and then turned from that to he got into the army and joined the Royal Scots Guards. I mean, you couldn't get any more influential than that and more heroic than that. Yeah. But I guess, what I wanted to say to you is trolls and being trolled. What do you make of that? And I'll turn it around on you and ask you a question. What do you make of that situation? Because it's interesting. You say you don't read the comments and you don't read the things that people post on your videos.
Sometimes I do. Like this past week, I've dived into it a bit more. But in regards to trolls, sorry to interrupt you there, by the way.
No.
In regards to trolls, like if you asked my wife what bothers me, she would say like it would take a sledgehammer to hit me over the head with a sledgehammer just to get my attention. I'm not really bullied easy. I'm not sensitive. I should be more sensitive towards people. That's probably one of the issues that I have in life, is not being sensitive. If I'm just going to be honest, I would read a comment, I'm going to murder you and your whole family, which I've had. And somebody said that they lived and they knew where I lived, and they sort of posted where I lived. And I just switched off the comments and just got about my life, and nothing ever happened. Where some people could take that very sensitive. Some people could ring the police, and that's okay. It's good to be like that too. But what I've noticed is what reading through certain other people's comments, I've noticed that there definitely is a network of people working together, whether they know it or not, but they are working together, and they're trying to just manipulate and start wars in the comments section and start rumors and lies about everybody. But that does not affect me in the slightest. It never has. I'm like that on YouTube. I'm like that in real life. It just does not affect me at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for me, I did a documentary during lockdown about the trolls that we had throughout the takeover, and we called it "Think Before You Tweet." We did a professional documentary during lockdown. We actually located a few of our trolls. We highlighted these people. We knew who they were, and we actually got 2 of them to come on screen, and we got them together in the room. They'd never met face to face. And it's one, I mean, I'm not one for pointing to my podcast channel, but if you went to my podcast channel, Steve Wraith, and just searched Think Before You Tweet, it's not monetized by me. I deliberately haven't monetized it. But what does happen with it is the more views it gets, it raises money for charity. It's well worth a watch, but watch it for a social experiment. And I think I'm more than happy to come back on and speak to you about other stuff, and we can discuss this after you've watched it. But it's a fascinating watch when you see 2 people who wholly admit that they were trolling. They trolled me and they trolled each other. See what it's like when you get them in a room together and actually get them to converse. And I'm sitting in the middle. And it's a fascinating watch. It's called Think Before You Tweet. I would advise people to give that a watch. But yeah, Run, more than happy to come back on. It's been a pleasure to come on. I'm glad I reached out to you. And as I say, the reason I reached out to you was because I've seen a few of your podcasts, and I didn't want you to get sucked into some of the negativity which has been surrounding our side of the water. And I just felt that you deserved maybe a chance to, have a chat about something which had nothing to do with that. But the troll thing was interesting because it's something that affects us all. It doesn't matter whether you're the true Geordie, whether you're Ronan, whether you're Steve Wraith, whether you're James English. It affects us all, and we all handle it differently. And I think it's important, because I think eventually there will be a clampdown by the governments, by the social media firms, because unfortunately, it will affect people. There will be repercussions. There will be something happens with somebody somewhere, and eventually it'll happen. I mean, I've already seen it. We highlighted it on this video that we did. We spoke to somebody who worked at a school, and suicides amongst kids who've been bullied relentlessly on social media. It's awful, and it's something that needs to be tackled and looked at. And I'll just be interested in your thoughts once you've watched that. So maybe we could start off the next interview talking about that.
100%, Steve. And listen, guys, go and watch all this on Steve's channel. I will also leave that in the description of this video. And I would suggest if you want to buy his books, if you want to watch his podcasts, it'll all be in the description. And I will definitely give that a watch. And we could do a separate podcast just on that. And we'll not mention any names about on the whole trolling thing. But what we'll do is we'll talk about the psychology and what actually goes on. And that's actually an interesting one for me, Steve.
It is, and I'd also say as well, not everybody's trolls. Some people aren't what they seem on the internet. Some people wear a mask, and some people who are trying to tell the truth are sometimes painted as the villain, and that's something which you can often see. On YouTube. You've got to be careful, and you kind of phrased before about the way you deal with things personally. You're in the real life. Well, there is a real life. Real life isn't this. Real life isn't me and you sitting in a little box. It's about seeing each other face to face. And, it is a big world out there. And some people don't like to meet in the real world. Some people like to hide behind an anonymous account. Some people like to, and it is a lot different. Before I finish, I would like to say a big shout out to Patricia Devlin, who, I did a podcast with. She's a very famous journalist in Ireland, got a lot of huge respect for her. And to my brother from another mother, Grant Nesbitt, one of Belfast's finest. Good big shout out to him as well. I'll be seeing you soon, brother.
Oh, so you'll be coming over to Belfast at some stage?
Definitely, 100%. That is the plan. I've promised him I'll come back over. I did a show out there many years ago with Carlton Leach and Dave Courtney, and me. I hosted it, and I met up with some interesting people out there. It was fantastic. And I'm planning on a trip over with Brendan Quinn at some time. It's about time we came over, and maybe he's had a pint of Guinness. I haven't had a pint for 10 years, so maybe it's time to have a pint of Guinness for me. Trip over there.
I love the Guinness. I love the Guinness. I don't know what it is. People come from America, England, all over, and they try Guinness, and they find it really hard. But you know what? I'm not a big drinker, but I do drink Guinness now. Steve, it was absolutely an honor to have you on the podcast tonight, and your wealth of knowledge. Your life experiences as an actor, an author, now a podcast host, giving everybody a platform. You're a very, very well-spoken man, and I would love to have you back on the podcast at some stage. Steve, thank you very much for coming on.
Thanks, mate. Top man. Respect.